The UK is officially leaving the EU tomorrow. This comes nearly 3.5 years since 17.4 million people opted for Brexit in a referendum. Here to discuss is Duncan Edwards. He's the CEO of BritishAmerican Business, which helps to try and foster cooperation between businesses in the UK and the US. We also, of course, had the Bank of England today holding rates steady. So a lot going on the Brexit front. I actually want to start there. Given the economic conditions in the UK, was it a surprise that the bank held rates steady? And are you optimistic about the direction of economic growth?
Well, I think since the election result in December, which I think gave a majority that was bigger than most people expected, although on your show in December I did forecast a win for Boris, but I think it was bigger than expected, and this seems to have settled the Brexit question completely. So the UK will leave the EU in less than 48 hours, and there's definitely a renewed sense of optimism from politically and in the business circles in the UK. And so although there was a rumour of a rate cut today, the Bank of England has held that rate steady, which reflects better than expected economic activity in the UK during the last month.
And not just over the last month, but it seems as though the narrative has shifted a bit, right? That there had been a lot of predictions that the UK economy was really going to tank, and that we've seen some weakness, right? But that perhaps it hasn't been as bad as expected. But are we out of the woods? Because this is, even though the exit is happening within 48 hours, there's still a lot of process to get through.
Well, those who are in favour of Brexit would say that the economists have got this wrong right from the start. There were dire warnings of terrible economic outcomes if the UK voted to leave the EU. And in fact, that hasn't happened. And right now, the UK is forecast to grow faster than the EU, faster than France, faster than Germany, and more than double as fast as Italy. And so, I think economists are thinking again a little bit about that. That said, the Bank of England again issued a note of caution this morning in its forecast. We don't know exactly what the nature of the relationship will be between the EU and the UK at the end of the year. And so there is still some risk. But in general, the overwhelming kind of feeling is one of more optimism.
So we here have talked a lot about the US and the UK having to come to some sort of a new trade agreement. The UK and the EU have to figure that out as well. And obviously the EU is the larger trading partner. How are business leaders thinking about how critical these various agreements are going to be? Do you think it's going to be, it's been thorny already between the UK and the EU. Is it going to be a rocky path to get these agreements done?
Well, I think, first of all, that most businesses would have preferred not to leave the EU. Business doesn't particularly like change. If you could leave things as they are, then let business get on with life. That's really the ideal situation. But change is happening. And so the preferred outcome for UK businesses and American companies that are located in the UK is for an agreement to be reached with the EU first. So to come to an agreement quickly, particularly on trade, so to preserve zero tariffs and zero quotas, to enable trade flows across the channel as soon as possible.
Do you think that can happen now?
I think it can happen. I think that certainly if there's goodwill on both sides, and that's a big if, then it's perfectly possible to reach a trade agreement before the end of the year. The UK has said it's ready to do that. The EU has said it's ready to do that. But there will be points of tension, particularly around this so-called level playing field. The EU would like the UK to maintain the same standards as if it were on all sorts of issues, on goods and food and so on, as if it was still a member of the EU. The UK government has said, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to guarantee that. We need to be free and independent to write our own rules, and you should respect those. And it shouldn't impede trade.
Right.
So that's where the tension will be.
And just quickly, speaking of tension between the US and the UK, of course, we had that Huawei decision that the UK took to use Huawei for some of its services when it comes to implementing 5G. Is that going to be a problem?
It may be. I think the bigger one will be the decision to impose this digital services tax, which is still on the cards for April from the UK. The French have backed off, as you will have seen, after pressure from Steve Mnuchin and the president. So we'll see whether the UK goes ahead. Clearly, it's still a problem, but it's interesting. Those who thought that there'd be just a love-in between Mr. Johnson and the president, it certainly hasn't started that way. There's a couple of points of real friction.
Yes, we'll see if they stay intact. Thank you so much, Duncan. Good to see you. Duncan Edwards, CEO of British American Business. Appreciate it.
Hey, investors. Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.